I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers today. I'm sure they don't need much introduction, but I will say a few words. Nikita Gill is a British Indian writer and poet living in the south of England. She's a Pushcart Prize 2018 nominee, counts Alanis Morissette amongst her legions of fans, and her words have entranced hearts and minds all over the world. Tara Joshi is going to be in conversation with Nikita, and she is a British Indian journalist who has written for publications including Gaudem, The Guardian, Days, The Quietus, Burnt Roti, and The Financial Times. She was born in Mumbai, but raised on the Isle of Wight. Her focus is predominantly arts and culture, notably in music, though she has also written frequently on South Asian identity and representation in Britain. She's contributed to the BBC Asian Network, the Unpopped podcast, and spoken on various panels about the creative industries. So please join me in giving a really warm welcome to Nikita Gill and Tara Joshi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I think as we just said, this is very exciting. This is such a nice little crowd. I think to get things started, Nikita's going to do some readings for us.
I am going to start by reading a couple of poems which I've written about back home and some events back home in India. So this poem is called Dissonance. Going back to New Delhi feels like reopening a wound. All I can taste is the skin salt and waterlogged pungency, the air pregnant with memory, the air swallowed by cacophony. A street seller bares his teeth whilst he barters his heart, his voice buried in the damp between traffic and everyman, his soul haggled for kanyan, his spine folded in quarters again. I see the defeat clinging to fingernails before I see faces here. The city is a listless old man draped in a congested cloak of clamor. Hunger cleaved in children's stammers. Hunger smashed into faces with hammers. Somewhere in this city, the three men who assaulted me have found a happiness that as yet eludes my existence. What is bygone cannot be fooled by distance. Happiness is best preserved by dissonance. Somewhere in this city, the man who murdered my friend visits the temple more than he ever visited the police station. I hope he prays out of contrition, that to God at least he gives his confession. There are 590 temples in this city, where no one sees how the land has been drowned in blood, where some were forever lost in the flood, where home is a memorial made of mud. The next poem I'm reading is called Oil Painting. There's a small trigger warning over here for the word rape, but there's no description or anything. It's just the word. Just so anyone is. Oil painting. The day before the rape, I spent an ancient afternoon in a kitchen clammy with childhood, a dark hand covering the sky monsoon. Mother's voice hollow hummed like a half-bewitched beckoning, her arthritic fingers turning lines in coriander with unease, tensing. The disease is new to her still. A drought settled deep within her bones, corrupting the fiber of her movements, pain drowning her deafness to stone. Outside, the storm assaults the earth, as though at war with a holy land. The dry thirst ends with dust fleeing, water takes over and floods sand. A clatter, a movement, a murmur of apology to the room instead of me tonight. The chutney will curdle later for the first time, but she does not know that yet. Hindsight. The past is time travel with prejudice. Mother will remember this moment differently. Such is the result of memorizing specters, even though haunting is diagnosed individually. Later, as fabric still rips violently outside in a thunderous, powerful composition, we sit in candlelight, watching the curtains. Mother calls, the lightning dark-lit premonitions. A decade has passed like a stranger through a decrepit, elapsed town, yet this soft oil painting of a memory lingers, like the last jewel in a fallen sky's crown. Right. Thank you.
So, I mean, those were beautiful and also kind of horrible at the same time. And I know you were saying earlier that these poems, the poems specifically about India, you've published those in literary reviews. And I was wondering if there's a specific reason for that?
I kind of find that poetry like this is more academically styled poetry. And because it's a lot longer, the frame of like Instagram doesn't let me really post longer pieces with a lot of ease. People can't look at it, people can't. So it's easier to kind of publish them in, say, a literary review. And also I'm able to talk about things with so many layers in a literary review, where, especially because these went to literary reviews which were specifically targeted to the Asian community, I felt like there was more understanding, whereas Instagram is a more worldwide global audience, you know, so it's just almost a way of communicating with my community, because I got a lot of messages from girls from Delhi who are like, oh, I really identified with this poem Dissonance, especially when it comes to that juxtaposition of religion versus what's really happening. You know, they say like, oh, the woman is a goddess, but at the same time, assault is at its highest level ever against women in New Delhi. So it's one of the reasons why I wrote that poem. Yeah.
And I mean, later on we will get back to Instagram as a medium, but in general, to what extent has, because obviously a lot of your work deals with femininity and female power, and I can only speak to my experience of being British Indian, but the kind of expectations of what femininity means in an Indian household, and I guess, yeah, to what extent do you think being from where you are from has shaped your subject matter?
I think almost everything, every writer is made of experience, right? Like we are just the sum, in fact, every human being is just the sum of their best experiences and their worst experiences. And New Delhi was the place where not only did I grow up there, I went to university there, and they've got this saying, because I went to NIFT, it's the National Institute of Fashion Technology, so I was a big part of like BU basically, even though it's a professional course, like they, you know, it just, they say that once you do university in that city, your frame about that city changes. Like even if you've grown up there, like the way you perceive your city completely changes, because I believe the ages of 18 to 22 are really pivotal years in your life. You know, they mold you, and you are full of passion, and you're full of idealism, and you're full of these ideas, and you want to go out there and change the world. And then you start realizing as you're going through these, you know, maybe first experiences of major heartbreak, and realizing, oh, you know, when they said work hard and, you know, you will reap the benefits of that, that's not always true. So you're experiencing these like things which really change you, and you're meeting people from all sorts of backgrounds. Like I still think school is quite protective, you know, like in the way that you're made to wear uniforms, so there's none of that, you know, like you kind of exclude people based on how they look and all of that. But university, people do that so much. You know, in school you do have things like cliques and stuff like that, and you think once I get out of high school, it'll be amazing because everything will change and there's no more cliques and everyone will just, but it doesn't work out like that. University is just like more of an extension of the same sometimes. And that's kind of why I feel like being in Delhi in university really kind of molded who I was going to be even now. So yeah.
And do you feel like now being in London, looking back on what your time in Delhi was like, do you feel like it feels different? And do you think differently of Delhi as a city now you're no longer there?
You know, it's interesting because I was talking to a friend about this the other day, but when you leave, I was 24 when I came here and settled down. When you leave your city and you look back at experiences, and this is just hindsight, I talk a lot about hindsight in my work, the way you perceive your experiences completely changes. I think everyone here would kind of know that the thing which you perceived when you were a child, as through a child's lens, 20 years later you look back at it and go, oh my God, that was so wrong. Or actually, I really messed up there. Like, I should have done this instead of this. And that's the tragedy of hindsight. So I kind of feel like looking back at Delhi now and kind of the things which I was like okay with, I really shouldn't have been okay with, particularly towards the treatment of poorer people. We have a huge problem with casteism, and that does go forward into the city quite a bit. The culture of, like, say, servants and why they are servants. Like, that didn't even occur to me until I came here and started really looking back at my culture and going, oh my God, like, we oppress the poor so much. It's ridiculous. So stuff still occurs to me, it blows my mind. Yeah.
And you've spoken before about anger and how. So I read this interview with you doing some prep yesterday, and you spoke about the anger you felt, for example, about how men ogle women in the streets, and that again, like, I feel like I can only be. I do come to India as something of an outsider. It's that weird dichotomy of being both. But it is something that, when I was younger, I guess I didn't think that much about. But it's going back now, and it's, you know, you kind of see, you feel a bit like a piece of meat walking through markets sometimes. And did you feel like it was important to be talking about this stuff in your work? Like,
yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's I've only just about come around to, like, digesting this experience fully, but I often say I've been angry since I was 12 years old, and
which is also the time you started writing.
Yeah. Funny how that worked out. But yeah, I've been angry since I was 12 years old, and the reason is because when I was 12, I had this experience which basically changed the way I looked at my mother, but, like, it wasn't her fault. And the reason, because, you know, when you're a child, especially like daughters, the way that we view our mothers when we're very small children, between the ages of like 0 to like 12, they're like saints, they're goddesses. They provide, you know, our food, they provide our water, they provide shelter, they provide everything. And your connection, like my mom, because my dad wasn't around a lot, he used to be home only about 4 or 5 months in a year because he was in the merchant navy. My mom was both parents to me. And in my eyes, she was this incredible human being that just did everything alone, including, like, bring up my brother and me, and, like, in this very dangerous city for women. And I thought that was incredible. And then when I was about 12, we went for this walk through this market town. And it was, I think it was Horsecars. I don't even remember where we were. And Horsecars is quite a lovely place, actually. I went to my universities there. NIFT was there. So, and we're walking down, and there were these guys who literally followed us and who said some of the most awful things about my mum, and it made me cry, because how can somebody reduce my mother, the goddess, to a piece of meat? And it occurred to me that the reason why, like, this is why it's taken me this long to digest this experience and realize why I'm so angry. It's because I felt like I was robbed of, like, this pedestal which I put my mum on. And it was a really hurtful, harmful experience for a small child who sees her mother as everything. And then suddenly that's taken away from her. And I didn't process it well, and it affected our relationship. And it really, really bothered me that but I didn't know why it affected our relationship. It's because someone had ripped something away from me, and I hadn't known how to process it. And I think there's not a girl in the world who hasn't gone through a similar experience on some level with their mum, you know? And that's what kind of breaks my heart, and that's why I've been so angry for so long.
And I mean, it's something that I really enjoy in Fierce Fairytales, the kind of the fact that you talk about the mothers of, you know, the fairy tale princesses, and you sort of rework the stories and look at figures that we maybe don't think about that much.
Yeah.
And we will get on to fairy tales in a bit. But I guess I just wanted to go back and talk about how you got started writing and what brought you then to Tumblr and then to Instagram.
So I have been like putting my work out there on the internet for roughly like 10 years. 10 years? Yeah. But by and large, it was anonymously because I don't know if you guys remember, but 10 years ago, the internet was not the way it was as it is just now. I mean, it was relatively Kardashian-free, which was a good thing. But yeah, like, it's interesting to watch the internet evolve as a landscape because it makes me think about how 20 years ago, I don't know, I've always felt like 90s kids, and I consider myself a 90s kid, like our childhoods went so quickly, and it's only because technology evolved so fast in the last 20 years that our childhood feels like it's years and years and years ago, but it's not. It's 20 years or something like that, you know? So for me, when I first started putting my name to my work, it was primarily because I realized a lot of my work was just floating around in various realms of the internet, and it didn't even have my name on it. And
didn't one of the Kardashians share your work without your name on it?
God damn it, Chloe. Every conversation, like honestly, like this is the problem with putting your work out there on social media, is for some reason, people will take your, you know, this happens to artists all the time as well. You create this beautiful piece of work, you put your piece of your soul in it. That's what all artists do, and all writers do. So put a piece of your soul in it, and someone goes, I really like that. You know, the one thing that will make it perfect, let's crop the name out. Why? If there's anything that frustrates me, that is the one thing, because it's like, we like the poem, but for some reason the name is the thing which is bothering me. So I'm just gonna rip the name out and then just use it, and that's pretty much what, I gave that poem to the world after that, to be fair. I was like, just keep it, just keep it. Let the tabloids talk about Lamar Odom and Khloe Kardashian's relationship using this poem. I don't want it anymore. Do you, world? But yeah, the reason why I started putting my name on Instagram from Tumblr was because people were cropping my name out. The reason I started putting my name on my work and putting it on Tumblr in the first place was because I grew brave enough to do that. Very anxious person. I've had anxiety since I was, again, 12. Funny how everything links back to that experience. But yeah, it's just, I started putting my name to my work because I used to work at this school for young people with severe disabilities, and it was mainly wheelchair specific. And one of my kids said to me at one point, because they'd seen me writing something, and they were like, what were you writing about? So I read this, you know, small, but in fact it was 93% Stardust, one of the earliest workings. And I read this out, and he looks at me and he's like, okay, what are you gonna do with it? And I hadn't considered doing anything with it at the time. It's such a small poem. And he's like, you should put it on the internet. Have you heard of Tumblr? And I'm like, what's that? Because I'm old. But yeah, like he said, have you heard of Tumblr? And I was like, okay. And he showed me. And he says, you should put your poem on here. So I put it on there, and I didn't put my name on it. He's like, why aren't you putting your name on it? What is wrong with you? So I said, well, the people will judge me. He's like, hi, do you know how much people judge me? He's sitting in a wheelchair, and I'm saying to him, people will judge me. And I was like, yeah, that was a bit of a faux pas. I should have thought that one through. But he made a lot of fun of me, and he said that, honestly, if you don't put your name to your work, no one will ever know that the person who's giving them that positivity and that inspiration is this person. And they won't be able to come and find you and find more positivity and inspiration or felt understood. And that experience is basically what made me put my work on Tumblr. It just changed things.
And so the switch from Tumblr to Instagram, was there a particular reason for that?
Bloody Khloe Kardashian was the reason for that.
Okay. And I mean, you spoke briefly about the difference between longer poems for literary reviews and like denser poetry, perhaps. But I mean, I think there can sometimes be kind of a negative insinuation, or kind of as though it is less intellectual when you talk about like insta poetry. And I was wondering how you felt about that.
You know, I really strongly disagree with this really weird elitism which is formed around different types of poetry. Firstly, insta poetry is not a genre. Many different types of poets share their work on Instagram. Therefore, it is a medium. And secondly, like, when did poetry become this really precious little thing in this very insecure little club of people going, no, you can't touch my poetry unless you've done an MFA? Like, I don't remember when I was studying it in school ever being like that, but maybe I was wrong. I look at like a lot of young people sharing their poetry on Instagram as the YA genre of poetry. I know that the people who relate to my work when I write on Instagram and like put together like quick poems for Instagram, they're very young people, and they're identifying with this work because it wasn't written 200 years ago by Keats, and it's written by a woman of color for other women of color, or you know, a queer woman for other queer people, or you know, there is representation in this genre which is unfiltered, and it's bypassed the gatekeepers, and that's pissed the gatekeepers off. I've heard a lot of people say, a lot of people in the literary establishment say a lot of crap about insta poetry, but we don't really have much to say about them because we're here, you know, like it used to take winning the Pulitzer to sell 10,000 books of poetry. Rupi Kaur, sitting in her bedroom, outsold whole bestseller lists just by herself. And there's something to be applauded about that.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, just getting your voice out there, just, it democratizes the process, I guess.
Exactly. And in fact, that's one of the things that the establishment takes issue with. I read a huge thread on Twitter about, oh no, the democratization of poetry is a very big problem and we shouldn't be allowing this. And I'm like, why? Like, why is poetry going to the masses a bad thing? Like, we are literally 99% of this planet. Like, why should that be just for the 1% who've done an MFA and it's become so insular? Like, you know, someone's talking about their experiences in 7 different layers of stuff. And you can't really relate to it because you have to sit there and analyze each like line. And there's a beauty to that. I loved reading Sylvia Plath's work. I think she's amazing. I love reading, you know, John Keats, and I love reading the Romantics. But in general, that poetry requires me to be sitting in that frame of mind where I'm going, right, I'm going to have to sit and analyze each and every line in this poem to understand what the poet is saying. I don't want people to have to do that with my work. I want people to like read it and go, oh, that made me feel really good, or that made this emotion come out of me, or that moved me. And from putting my poetry on Instagram, I'm just meeting the most incredible people, you know, who are sharing stories with me, which are, I just couldn't replace them for the world, you know. Like there was a young person who told me that they were able to face their abuser in court because of one of my poems. I mean, would you replace those experiences to like be accepted by this very small club of very elite people? I don't think so.
That's incredible. And I mean, we've spoken about, I guess, the benefits and limitations of social media as an artist. And I guess you've touched on this idea that social media for a reader is, you can pick out things that are relatable to you. But obviously one of the big pitfalls of social media, as is put to us anyway, is this idea that it encourages kind of like compare and despair, and you kind of, particularly I think with young people and perhaps especially with young women, there's this kind of concept of, you see like beautiful people on Instagram, you see all these experiences and you kind of worry like that should be me. And in Wild Embers you have that poem Journey, which is kind of about that, kind of about how we get so worried about other people's journeys that we stop focusing on the one journey that is actually important, which is our own. I guess I just kind of wondered, was that an intentional connection, or is that just something that you've been thinking about?
It's really interesting. Like, don't go on fitness Instagram. just don't do it. It's a big mistake. But then, to be fair, like I feel like Instagram, all social media, is the highlight of either the best or the worst in your life. And I said right at the beginning of this thing that a human being is not just, they are the sum of the best and worst experiences of their life, and the sum would be, the combined total of the two. Well, all those moments in the middle which, you don't see the person, like just having those really big experiences which you don't have a camera for, and you see somebody like, I don't know, even the Kardashians having a bad hair day, or like, you don't see any of that. And the whole point of like things like social media was to be able to communicate with your friends. I feel like that's why social media was invented. You keep in touch with people from long distances, stuff like that. Putting, for artists it was great to put our art out there, but it's turned into this thing. It's turned into this own little devil of itself, where people are now either arguing a lot. I feel like in the last 2 years, the amount of trolls saying homophobic, racist, misogynistic things has gone up by like exponentially. There's a poem in this book which talks about trolls for this exact reason, because I just feel like the amount of trolls and the amount of people who are trying to rip you apart and trying to pull you down, it's just gone up exponentially. And this is, again, because of the whole I am right and you are automatically wrong because I am right culture. Which again comes down to the compare and contrast thing. Like you can't, people are unique. We are all different and we all nuanced. You may overlap and agree with somebody on 3 things, but you're not going to overlap and agree with them on every single thing in this world. And that's what makes us beautiful. And that's what makes us interesting. But for some reason, that's become a bad thing on social media. And I really disagree with that. Even though I made my career on social media, I disagree with that fundamentally.
Well, I mean, you just brought up the book, and I guess maybe now is a good time before we get into asking about some of these poems. Maybe you could read a few.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. All right, I'm going to read this one because it's my favorite one from the book. It's called The Fable in Thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics states this: energy can neither be created nor destroyed, which is to say that everything around us is recycled energy. You, me, your dog, those we love and those we avoid. Which is to say that the energy that makes us is as ancient as the beginning of time itself. Which is to say that the bones could have been made fragmented together from the ashes of the library of Alexandria. Which is to say our sinews and spine were crafted from the end of 100-year-old oak tree and our smiles from a comet. which is to say, our hearts could be Achilles' spirit when he battled at Troy, bringing his enemies down with it, which is to say, when we feel like life is overwhelming, we must remember that we are just sparks of energy borrowing skin, that no matter how much this pain feels everlasting, this is just temporary fabric we are in. I'm going to read a few more poems from this book because this was probably the hardest book which I've written, only because it's a very thematically based book. And it was me kind of trying to break out of this idea of, Insta poetry can only be this one thing. So this poem is called Child's Play. It always begins when we are children, with imaginations so big, we put whole universes to shame, whilst running and playing and shouting in the white-hot sun, before prejudices stop our feet. We tell our stories layered with childlike epiphany and fiery self-belief. We squabble over who gets to play the princess or the hero prince. None of us want to be the dragon that is slayed, nor the ogre, nor the witch. Right there in our child's mind, we decide everyone can be only very evil or very good. We never stop to consider that all of us are capable of doing terrible things. But if we look back and we try to truly understand, we will remember what we should. We have all taken turns being Red Riding Hood, and we have all been the wolf. So this one's called Trapped. It's, again, one of my favorite poems in the book, and I think this will come clear at the end of this book. You may be gentle and sad now, girl, but you are still made from daring dreams, wading through the silhouetted thoughts in your own hapless mind that harness you. He's mercurial in his love, but more so his violence. Knowing this need not be a ruinous thing. Knowledge, after all, is a dark art, full to the brim with liberty, a trembling, malleable power, and it is yours for the taking. You were called Alice after your mother, who took on Jabberwocks and armies and won. Your own Jabberwock awaits. Fearless already runs through your blood. Now, do it justice. It's always hard to pick poems to read because you change your mind at the last minute. I forget who said this, but someone recently said that it turns out that the best time to edit your book is months and months after it's been published, 5 minutes before an event. Who knew? Right. This is a longer poem, and it's called The Trolls, because we were just talking about that, and I feel like it's really relevant to social media. It's after Shane Coyson. I don't know if you guys have heard his poem. It's brilliant. So, prologue. We have talked about them before, but it appears their numbers have doubled, have tripled, have quadrupled since. So here is an origin story about the monsters amongst us with no princess or prince. The story, vanished beneath bridges. There were once brewing beasts we gave a different name. We call them trolls, short for transformations veiled to humans with hearts and souls. In desperation to save themselves from the dreadful damp below bridges, a rumor broke loose, nailing the coffin into their last collective shred of decency, that devouring a human's heart would give them what they need. So they began to prey on humanity. But the more they tried to hurt us, the more we fought back, until one day we finally managed to beat them back, until the stories became legend and the legends became myths. Yet this is where the story really begins. You see, the trolls were never dead. They were simply asleep, biding their time, waiting for us to forget them, to leave them as fairy stories. When the first child turned on his first computer, a tremor was felt, and that was when they rose from their man-made prison hell. They wore new avatars and had learned to embrace their lack of empathy and morality. Instead of hearts, they now devoured hopes, dreams, an entire human just being. They seek out the depressed and find the lonely. They make targets out of children and sow divisive seeds amongst friends and family. Although the words on a screen, they make weapons, sticks and stones, shovels to bury dreams. They break open souls, eat whatever happiness is left inside, and cause deaths and suicides, destroy families and cause loss using just words, lies, twisted into more lies. We cannot hide from them. We cannot beat them back. We cannot turn them into stories again. We must face simple facts. They now live amongst us. Their bridges are burned and gone. They wear armor made of gold, still lacking hearts, no songs in their souls for them to truly hold. We cannot protect our children from this evil being, but we can teach them how to protect themselves. You see, the trolls may have taken over the internet highways and chat rooms and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, but they have forgotten something crucial that humans know all too well. A monster is only a monster if we allow it to live in our minds and swell. So we teach our children now that even though monsters exist, the best way we can defeat them is to never give them influence over the way our minds make thoughts or over what our hearts express. Oh. I wish I could take my own advice and ignore them, but it's so hard to do.
Do you read your comments? No.
Oh my God, I have a problem. Honestly, I feel bad for my other half because he's the most non-confrontational person I know. And I am basically Nikita Confrontation Gill, who's like out there to like stop injustice in the world. Usually for me, any marginalized person being treated badly or being targeted by, say, white supremacists or MRAs or I am just there. I will die in a field for them. I have a problem. So when I read my comments as well, it's kind of really hard for me not to respond because the amount of, the reason I wrote this poem is because the amount of racist, misogynistic comments towards me had increased exponentially, especially in the last year. And I was like, I have got to learn to switch off and not feed the trolls, because that's what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So I wrote this poem to give myself the advice of, please, 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 please stop letting them get under your skin. I'm still very bad at it. We never take our own advice, do we? But yeah, hopefully I'm getting slightly better. I have my other half take the internet away from me these days, which is always fun. He hides my phone. He hides my phone. He also hides my laptop, which is probably the best thing he can do for my mental health. So yeah.
I think we're going to open up to the floor for any questions.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Did you always want to be a poet, or did you have something else in mind when you were a child?
So I've been writing since I was 12, right? And my first love's always been fiction. I love fiction. I think fiction is amazing. And I started writing poetry because poetry was a way to encapsulate this very strong emotion which I felt in a single moment. And I started putting it on Tumblr, and then it went wild. I was not expecting that, but I enjoy writing poetry so much that it's just become a part of the way I exist now. Fiction still is my first love, which is why I'm writing a book of short stories, dystopian feminist short stories. That's yeah.
Any more questions?
I wonder what you think about censorship and kind of policing social media platforms, what the responsibility of, Twitter's just banned the person who runs InfoWars. So several other platforms. A lot of people think they shouldn't be doing that to anyone, no matter what they're expressing. So what are your views on that?
I actually think that in regards to free speech, social media was always supposed to be democratic. And if that meant that there were going to be people on there saying things which were horrendous and abusive towards other people, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Twitter is a privately owned company. So are Instagram, so is Facebook. We can't really apply free speech laws to them, but I completely disagree with the censorship of anything. In fact, I think what we should be worrying about is algorithms. The fact that they control every single thing that we see. And it's basically companies who are promoting only they're basically reading what we are writing and like only showing us things that, they think they should promote. And that, I think, is a huge violation of freedom of speech. And the fact that I feel like the internet laws have always been 5 years behind what is actually happening. So companies are going to continue to get away with this kind of censorship and this kind of, algorithmic kind of control what people can see. It's fairly abusive, I think, that when you are on, say, Instagram or Facebook or any of those, all of your followers will not see what you are posting, which is really problematic for small businesses and artists. In fact, it's killed a lot of small businesses because they want you to promote your posts so that your own followers can see them. As far as I'm concerned, when someone hits that follow button, they've chosen to follow you. They've chosen to connect with you. I mean, why shouldn't people be able to see your work? It's a complete violation of freedom of speech, but I feel like nothing is going to happen until 5 years later, which is something really bad will happen, and then the lawmakers will go, well, we can't stand for that, can we? And things will change. But until then, we're kind of stuck with this.
Hi, firstly I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. And also, so I was just wondering what sort of stories you enjoyed growing up and sort of how your creative process works. So how does it get from sort of your mind to like coming out on paper?
I think so. My favorite thing, my mum gave me, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Amar Chitra Katha. Yeah, I love those comic books. They were so great. And the Panchatantra tales. My mom gave me both of those when I must have been very, very young. And I feel like those really shaped the way that
classics.
Yeah, the classics. But it was the classics for children. Yeah. I was only like 7. And they really kind of molded the way that I looked at the world. And then I started reading Enid Blyton. And then I started going into other stuff. But my foundation was very much Panchatantra and Amar Chitra Katha and those kind of things. So that influences my writing a lot even today. So my short stories aren't really what I'm known for, but there are so many characters in there that reference, the characters of Panchatantra. That's what kind of has influenced my work today.
Any other questions?
Hi, Nikita. So, apart from not responding to trolls or not getting affected by trolls, what would be the other advice that you would give to young and budding poets who want to make a living off writing poetry for social media?
There are tragedies inside all of us that need voices. And until you voice that tragedy, it's just going to remain a cry trapped inside you. And it's incredibly hard to be brave in this world since 2016, which has been so toxic, to voice those things. And I just genuinely feel that every single young writer out there needs to conquer that and just write the thing that will give that tragedy a voice. So that's the only advice which I usually give to young people. Be unafraid and give that tragedy a voice. It's your truth. The world needs to hear it.
Anyone at the back, maybe? Please. Sorry.
I really love your work, and particularly Wild Embers. It speaks to my heart. And I was really interested to ask, what inspired you to rewrite the fairy tales?
It's so in Wild Embers or Fierce Fairytales?
In Wild Embers.
Oh, okay. I don't know, I just find, so all of my heroines in Wild Embers in the fairy tale section, they all came from these very these stories where women are very passive. You know, Little Red Riding Hood, the turning her into a character that kind of takes control of her story from the wolf and kind of goes after the wolf by herself. That's one of my favorite stories in there because I've always thought Little Red Riding Hood is a bit of a badass. If anything, she is the wolf, and that's a more interesting take on her.
I love the bit in Fierce Fairytales where the mum finds her as like queen of the wolves.
Yeah, she's the alpha wolf. I've always seen her like that, and I've always seen women in general as very powerful people. So to take these characters who are quite passive, like Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, who basically are asleep, and then they experience true love's kiss. And suddenly they're like, you know, they're shipped off and they get married to these princes. My biggest issue with that was, say, consent. So it was just these little things which I was like, do I want to read my daughter Sleeping Beauty and this guy kisses her not only without her permission, she's unconscious. Like, in a post-Me Too society, is that a story that we want to be reading our kids? Which is why I rewrote all of those stories, because I feel like it's really important to take back our fairy tales and rewrite them for a new generation of young women who are so empowered.
Anyone else?
Hi, Nikita.
Hi.
Firstly, I'd just like to say I'm a massive fan of your work, and it's been great being here today. It's a fairly generic question, but do you ever experience writer's block, and what do you do to overcome it?
Oh, I think there isn't a writer in the world that hasn't gone through like really bad writer's block, and I get big bouts of it, especially after finishing writing a manuscript. The best thing you can do is free write. You know, like that person in your head who's basically saying, no, you can't do this, you can't write, I'm not going to let you do it. Just free write. Pass that person, like literally, like just keep writing despite what they're saying, and when you revisit that writing, say it's a page, 2 pages, 3 pages, you'll see, like you'll eventually come up with a sentence and you'll be like, oh, actually that's quite good. And you revisit that again, and then you build on that. So writer's block can only be conquered by writing, which is really paradoxical, but that's what I do.
Anyone else?
Hi.
Hi.
So you talked a little bit about mother and mother as the goddess. And I wonder whether you could speak to the fact that so many mothers in fairy tales are either wicked or evil or trying to poison the heroine. There seems to be this real dichotomy between the sweet, innocent princess and the evil stepmother. So where do you think that comes from, and how do you explain that, I guess?
In Fierce Fairytales, one of my favorite things which I've explored is Cinderella's stepmother and her ugly stepsisters. And I've given them a backstory each. And the reason is because I believe that processing trauma wrong makes people bad. I believe that if you've gone through something and you've not just processed it wrong, somebody who is very influential in your life has forced their opinions. It's like a cycle, you see. And I feel like Cinderella's stepmother is basically one of those people, or stepmothers in general, or in fact, absent mothers are a very big problem in fairy tales as well. They have processed their trauma wrong and are instigating a cycle of abuse. I don't think there's anything in this world that can't be explained about a person like that. You know, I just genuinely believe that all people don't start out as evil. We all start out at like point neutral, right? And then we're influenced into various things. And I believe that society in general looks at women and holds us to a really high moral perfection. like always held to a really high standard. You must be there's this culture of the perfect victim. You know, like when someone comes forward with their story of abuse or trauma, the first thing people say is, oh, but they're lying. Then if it's proven to be true, oh, but they deserved it. If it's proven that this person doesn't deserve it, oh, but they must have done something. Because we want moral perfection from our victims to consider them victims. And that's kind of why I think there's this like perpetuation of abuse, and why mothers kind of process their traumas wrong and then take it out on their daughters. So.
Hi, thank you so much for today. I really relate to all of your work, and I love following you on Instagram. But I was wondering, in general, what are the biggest lessons you've learned in life?
Oh, wow. I don't even know where to start on that, but I think the biggest lesson and the most difficult lesson I've ever learned is just that everything in this world is about letting go. It's about letting go of the things that hurt you. You don't have, like, I'm a big believer in this, not forcing forgiveness, you know, like not having to forgive your abuser to let go of the pain. I believe in forgiving yourself. But I believe that all of life is just a process of letting go of experiences, letting go of people, letting go of things that hurt you, letting go of, you know, at some point we all let go of our parents. And once you get better at that act of letting go, life starts making more sense to you, and it starts getting a bit easier for you, because you realize that being human is basically all about letting go. So yeah, that's the biggest lesson I've learned.
I think we've got time for one more question. Nikita's signing, so she'll probably answer more questions.
Hello.
Hi.
I read that your first manuscript was rejected by 137 publishers. How do you see yourself as of today, and what advice do you have for the youngsters out here how to take?
Okay, get used to rejection if you're a writer or an artist. That is like 137 rejections. That's been touted a lot. It's not that bad. Jack London was rejected 600 times before White Fang was published. 600 times! We don't even have to talk about how many times J.K. Rowling was rejected. It is just a nature of the beast. I've always said this, no matter how successful or great you become as a writer, there's always going to be someone out there who does what you do better. And being humble to that and realizing that this is never a craft you will be perfect at is probably the greatest thing you can do for yourself as a writer, because you will constantly evolve then. That's the only thing that you can do as a writer, is evolve your work, you know, and keep putting it out there. If it gets rejected, rarely are rejections personal. That's another thing which I learned. 80% of the time when someone rejects your work, it's got nothing to do with the writing. Sometimes the theme of what they're looking for is different. Publishing works all on trends. Sometimes your book just doesn't fit in with the trend, and they will reject it for that. It could be the next classic. You know, you could be the next Dickens, but they will reject it because it doesn't fit the trend. So just keep going and keep trying. And try. It's really hard, but try not to take it personally when someone rejects your work. Okay, that's best advice.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful conversation. Thank you to Nikita. Thank you to Tara.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for being here.